And in that opening, we get to create the life there. This is how human beings are special in God's eyes. We're co-creative in that moment. In that moment between an ending and a moment, and it's happening now. Oh, and it just happened. Oh, it's going to happen right now. It's happening all over the place. But each of us are creating something in there. By listening, by moving, by touching, by speaking, by caring, by not caring. And so, in that openness, the church, and I think our tradition, and not just our tradition, but many of our traditions today are in deep trouble because they're not keeping themselves within the 21st century, a world of quantum physics, of quirkiness and quarkiness, a place where things are moving in ways that we never could have imagined, where chaos itself seems to have its own hidden pattern that we're trying to identify. And so how do we keep up? And that's part of what the Day of Questions came out of, is just responding to how things sit and feel today. So, here we go. Does hell exist? Would God really send people there? Will there be a chance at final judgment when Jesus gives non-believers another chance to believe before sending them to hell? No, maybe, and perhaps. You know, one of the people in my life that I truly consider a mentor, who took me under his wing, was a guy named William Sloane Coffin Jr., who was an amazing human being. And he said, hell is truth discovered too late. Now, Bill Coffin had just gone through the war in Army intelligence, which turned into the CIA. And what he recognized is he spoke Russian fluently, and so he was part of that whole movement. And he was literally, after the war, sending all these expatriated Russians back to Russia. But he did not know that as soon as they got off the plane, Stalin was killing them until later, after about 800 people had been killed at his sending them back. His life crashed. He said, that was hell for me, and it's been hell ever since. But it pushed me into ministry. It got him out of intelligence work and into the Lord's work. So does hell exist? Yes. My dad, when he talks about the war, he went 3 years in the South Pacific, he's talking about hell. Now, is there an afterlife hell? You know, when it comes to the afterlife, I'm going to stay puzzled because I like it that way. Once I discovered that all time exists simultaneously, it really threw a crowbar into the works of afterlife, because there's a place, and I've done extensive studies on the quantum field. What's happening is so much weirder, stranger than I can ever say. But I will witness to this. Eternal life is real and true. Do not wait to die to taste it. It's available right here in our midst. You can find it in justice making. You can find it in truth. You can find it in love. You can find it in care. And that's real. And those places where those things are not, that's where hell's growing. That's all I can say. So I believe that there's hell on earth, but I also believe that there's a mystery that's going on. Now, I will say finally that when it comes to hell, I love the Muslims' hell a lot better than I love the Christian hell. In the Muslims' hell, you're still able to change your mind. And it's not about belief. It's about not being separate from God. Because people in hell are those who have separated themselves from God, usually with their own knowledge. We know it as dogma. Jesus said it very clearly. Certainty itself is the unpardonable sin. Once you're certain, you cut yourself off from God, and you're no longer receiving the next revelation. And my friends, every breath is the next revelation. So, I'm going to leave it at that. You've made Jesus in the Bible more understandable to me, thank you, Renata, by your knowledge of the habits and culture of those ancient days. There is so much conflicting info. Where can I find that history? What we're talking about is called exegesis, and I've talked about the two movements in any Bible study. There's exegesis and there's hermeneutics. Exegesis is going into the history of the time and getting to know what was really happening there. The image I use often is turning the other cheek. When a slave turns the other cheek to a master, that puts the slave on an equal level with the master, because you see, the master could only hit the slave with the back of their left hand, which is their unclean hand. When the slave turned their cheek, that meant the master would have to hit him with the back of his right hand, which was a clean hand, and you could only hit your equal with that hand. See what Jesus was doing? Very political. There's no place that I found where all of these things are there. They're everywhere. But I will say that we have a really cool tool. You can look up exegesis, Google it on any Bible verse, and it'll go into it. Marcus Borg is great. Anything Marcus Borg wrote, read it. Do I agree with him all the way? No. As I was sharing with John and Francis earlier, I don't agree with myself from morning to night, because God's usually had something to do with me, and I'm going, well, got that one wrong. What did Martin Luther say? Be bold. Go and make bold new sins. So that's on that. Good luck, Renata. It's all of our journey. Truth is its own puzzle. If you say there is a new paradigm coming, what might that look like? How could Christianity turn into blaming the oppressed and lifting up the powerful? Am I saying that right, hon? Okay. How can we turn that around? I think there is a new paradigm coming. The paradigm is based, I think it's going to come from science. I really believe that the Third Testament is this testament of truth. And we're now trying to sort out what is true and what is not. And that's where the new paradigm is going to come from. Where the myth, the symbol system, the narratives, and the stories that sustain us. I had a conversation with someone yesterday, a colleague, and she said, well, Red Hawk, we can't know how everything works. And I looked around the room and I realized, well, I know how everything works in here. And if I don't know how something works, I usually Google it. I mean, the first time I passed one of those windmills on the way to Seattle, I was Googling the gearbox. I want to know how they were translating that. Was it a worm gear? What was going on up there? And then I'm talking into a microphone. Where's that energy coming from? From the wind? I mean, what's the gearbox look like? Come on, doesn't that bother anybody? Microwave towers, these are radio transmitters. How is it we don't know they're radio transmitters and all these cell towers are transceiver towers? And that on about a half of them, there's a big old disc on the side called a microwave transmitter. And that's what does long distance stuff. Literally, it's line of sight across the country. I just ask questions. But what we came to the conclusion is we don't have to know everything. We just have to have a narrative that helps us understand how everything works. And that's the next myth. That story. What are the stories? I think they're starting to come. Star Wars, Avatar. The backstory of Avatar, if you just think about it, it's huge. It's huge. It's basically we toasted our planet, so we're going to exploit and rip other people off. You see, there are new stories coming, and that's where the new paradigm, where we're going to do. It's the story of the human family, not the story of America or Christianity or Hinduism or the Middle East or this. It's the human family's story, and we're all part of it. So, how could Christianity turn into blaming and oppressed and lifting up the powerful? It's the same thing that happens every generation. If you study the history of religion, and I think it was Huston Smith in his last book he wrote, that he said this, he explained this so well. Somebody sees a Jesus, a Muhammad, a Buddha, a Krishna, whoever Krishna really was. Somebody sees, and they begin to teach. And the teaching is powerful, and the people are just attracted to it. But the power people are sitting back going, there's some power in that teaching. And so what happens? Within anywhere from a generation to 300 years, it was a generation in Islam, it was about 300 years in the Christian church, the power is literally taken away from the soul of the human being and put into an institution for the sake of power. That's the predilection of human beings. That's what we're stuck in, okay? And it's been called sin. I don't like the word sin. I call it an algorithm that is not the right one. Sin is just, it's not this. So let's beat ourselves up for not this, or do we go, okay, not this, how about this? And if it's not that, well, how about this? You see, that's how, next time you're in an airplane, that's how you got in that airplane. Do you know how many itty-bitty noticings it took to create everything from lift to all the controls, everything in that airplane? We're talking, you're hanging on 3 miles, 5 miles up in the air on 1,000,000 years of evolution. And we're all just taking it for granted. Yep. It's a miracle. Yeah, I always call it the culture of the tube. It's definitely its own challenge. So how can we turn that around? I think we try to redefine stuff here. The church has turned into a bastion of comfort and justification instead of challenging with the truths of our time. And how do we do that in a gracious way? And I think, and I've said that to many of you, I think that's one of my failings is I'm good at saying it, but not very graciously. There's challenges because the human family's in deep trouble. And I believe the love of Jesus Christ is going to be integral to the salvific act that's going to help us. So keep loving, keep making justice. From Sarita, why does intolerance thrive? Intolerance thrives because of fear. Fear, so I was in Nashville visiting a friend, a colleague, and Nashville, Spokane, Seattle. Well, I just jumped all over the country. And Sophie and I were sharing music with each other, and I shared a song called Maggot Brain. Now, you all don't remember Clinton, not the Clinton president, but the psychedelic black dude Clinton who started the Funkadelics. I always say, give a black man LSD and the Funkadelics is what you get. But he talks about fear is the mind killer. And if we don't modulate our fear, we end up creating consequences that will drown us in our own consequences. So fear is really a movement that takes on intolerance. Intolerance is one of the attributes of the manifestation of fear. And we see that all over the place. And, our class, we've been studying the chakras and the sacraments, the Christian sacraments, how they relate to the different centers. And the whole concept of how fear messes us up over and over is amazing, Intolerance, hate, violence, all of those come out of fear. And how do we do, the opposite of fear is love. It's, the opposite of love is not hate, it's not indifference, it's fear. It's as simple as that. And believe me, love will dispel all fear. How do we get love back online? That's the issue. If the proper place for progress is the space between the mind and the heart, what are the next steps we can take in a society to find that balance? We are so mind-centered. What would that transition look like? Well, I think it's important, we're studying Carolyn Myss in the anatomy of the spirit, and she says in the 1960s something happened. She says the heart chakra opened, and she actually uses the conversation of people who are meeting, the kinds of conversations. Before the 1960s, a couple would meet and they would share their family of origin, their religion, their tribal stuff. They'd share something about their hobbies and things like that. In the 1960s, people started sharing their addictions, their problems, their weaknesses. My parents never shared that stuff with each other. My parents never shared that with me. My dad's dying and he still doesn't share that stuff with me, and it's happening right in front of my eyes. So I think part of what's going on is one of the things that Buddha says that I really love is the answer is in 3 words: attention, attention, attention. We are so distracted by what's going on all around us, we have failed to pay attention to what's going on in us. And I believe it was Emerson who said, what lays before us and what lays behind us is of little consequence compared to what lays within us. And we do not have an awareness of what's going on within us, and that's what has to happen. And I think that's happening, Josh. I do. If you look at the single magazine, Preventive magazine, the number of people reading that doubles every 6 years. The number of people that are involved in the human potentials movement doubles every 6 years. Everybody wants to know what's going on in them. It's crazy in here. Why is the divorce rate so high? Well, I'll tell you why. Carolyn Mice said it. Women became empowered in the 60s. They not only became empowered, but men opened their hearts. So it takes a new kind of man to live with a strong woman. And there ain't a lot of them around. So there you go. All right, moving on. Well, I'm trying to fly us through here. Mary Ann's not here, but I made her write down a question. What is the best way to open ourselves to examining strongly held beliefs that may not be true, but we are unaware that things could be other than they are?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. What is the best way to open ourselves to examining strongly held beliefs that may not be true? In other words, patterns of your life that are based on BS. But we are unaware that things could be other than they are, but we're not aware yet. All I can say is this nails why community is important. I would have both my feet still down my throat if it wasn't for this community. I would still be backtracking mistakes a mile back if it wasn't for my family and their honesty. This is what we do for each other. Now, that doesn't mean we're here to be correctives for each other, but we're here to lift up each other. And when I'm being lifted up by Josh in a way that shows the contrast between what he's lifting and where I am, I have to own that. So, Mary Ann, what I would say to you is stay in community, find good friends that you love and trust, and live boldly and live out loud. She says, an example, you're raised to believe that misfortune is a punishment, that blessed is a reward and or. You know, this is fourth chakra stuff. You know, maturation is moving beyond reward, punishment, faith. If you're still in reward, punishment, faith, you're probably somewhere around 5th grade. And I'm not saying this is a put down. I'm speaking developmentally in terms of the stages of faith and where you are. There's a point, and part of the problem is the church keeps people stuck in this place. We really do. I mean, the largest church in this country is Joel Osteen's. And what is he preaching every week? He's preaching the prosperity gospel, which is the antithesis. Jesus says, who are the blessed, the rich or the poor? Everybody. Okay? Well, what's wrong with this picture? People say, Red Hawk, I love your house. You're so blessed. And I said, well, I feel very fortunate to have this land and this place. But I feel blessed when I bring friends onto it. And Edie's had, you know, when she worked for the county, she started what was that group called? The Consumer Panel. She worked for mental health, and she realized the people in mental health, they should be, the people who use the resources should have their own say. So she created a consumers panel. And in the backyard, one guy was schizophrenic, and he wouldn't say who he was because he didn't know. One woman that was introducing herself says she's not really, would she say, enthusiastic. She's bipolar.
You go to Ferris. I stole a school bus from there once.
There you go. You see what I'm saying? I felt like we were blessed to have a place in the sunshine where Edie could have these unique, human, blessed people who were in need. That was blessing to me. So, we have to grow beyond. And this, you know, as I'm coming to the end of my ministry, and we do need to do our exit interview because I realize my own limitations. I'm such a grow or go kind of guy. And that, I'm confessing this, okay? Because not everybody's ready to grow. Some people need to hang, maybe even for a lifetime. See what I'm saying? So, be aware that we're all called to grow beyond where we are. And sometimes it's in itty-bitty steps. Thank God we have friends that'll hold us through that stuff. So how do we create a new evolved mythology which includes the old way of seeing humanity as fallen, in need of salvation, and our knowledge of science, evolution, of moving from imperfect to perfection? You know, the whole concept of fallen is interesting because that word, you know, that's a Hebrew text, the creation text, and they didn't necessarily call it fallen. You know, they got kicked out of the garden, they would say that, but it wasn't like our nature had fallen. That was kind of a Christian thing, and we did that somewhere around, I think, the 9th century or something. I can't remember theologically when we started dividing that up. And the whole concept of a new paradigm, and that, we've been talking about that here. You know, if you look at the physics or the astronomy or the universe in the Bible, it's a three-layered cake. You have heaven, you have us in the middle, and then you have the underworld. Okay, and that's it. And then right towards the end, in Jesus' time, this guy Ptolemy comes along, okay, and he starts talking about the resonance of the spheres. You know, and that's where Gnosticism, and I'm not going to go get into all that, but what happens is we begin to see our nature as less than, so that we end up beating ourselves up for being less than. And this is the power of the church versus seeing that we have a place to grow. And this is where, to me, Christian mysticism comes in, and even Christian science, not Christian Science as a group, but I'm thinking of Teilhard de Chardin and the Phenomenon of Man, who is a paleontologist and a Jesuit. He talked about we're beginning to see something in our nature that we have misinterpreted. And I'll go back to sin. See, if you look at what's coming out of UW, for instance, this guy created a model of evolution. It's called evolution as an algorithm. And he literally programs some stuff in there, and these little beings he creates, they fall short of what he wants them to do. But they create another being that either falls short or not. And if it's got a great characteristic, it keeps building on that. This is a computer model. See, I think that's what we're doing. What we do with the algorithm and what the church has done is we take a place where we're not getting it right, and I talked about this a few minutes ago, and we call it sin, and then we jam ourselves up there. When it's just one way of not doing it right. If you're getting it, you know, that ain't it. So how do we get out of this fallen nature? We have to create new language, new stories. And this is where mythopoetry comes in, the new narratives of the human family, the new myth that's slowly emerging. You know, think about Star Treks and Star Wars. Think about civilization. Science is now starting to talk about civilization as zero civilization, type 1 civilizations, type 2 civilizations. We had no concepts of that before science fiction. See, we're type 0 civilization. Type 1 civilization is where the whole planet, we end up learning to manage it and deal with the resources and care for it and actually manage it, be in accord with it. A type 2 civilization is where we're out amongst the stars, okay? And a type 3 civilization is where you cannot destroy the human family because we've already set up homes on a lot of different planets and other galaxies. You see how it works? How would we have even thought about that if not for the imagination, if not for science fiction, if not for this whole piece? You know, and I'll be honest, how would we even thinking about the love the way we are if it wasn't for Jesus Christ? So we have to move, and again, this movement from imperfect to perfect, and I'm going to say one more thing on this and then we'll move on. In Greco, and I've shared this before, in Greco-Roman thought, when you think of perfection, they think of an engineering design. For me, this cup is perfect. I can close it so when I tip it over, it doesn't come out. It keeps things warm or cold. I can stick it in my pocket like this and carry it around. It fits really good in my car rack and the one in the supermarket. See what I'm saying? It's a perfect cup. But that's not the way that Jesus was thinking about perfection, or the Aramaic language thinks about things, or that the Jewish Hebrew language thinks about things. You see, the Western languages think about things in discrete quantities. In the Middle East, they don't think discrete. It's more like an endocrine system. You're moving from one to the other, okay? So perfection for Jesus was not finally having a love that we can say, I'm going to find that love that Jesus had. No, It's learning to love today a little more than we loved yesterday. That, a perfect love for Jesus is one that's always growing. Remember the time when he was at the Syrophoenician well and the woman asked him to heal her? And he said no, and basically called her a dog, which a female dog is what? Seriously, it's in the Bible. I'm not making this up. Oh, that's my son. The point is, she confronted Jesus. She challenged him and said, but don't the dogs even get the crumbs that fall from the table? And at that moment, Jesus grew, because at that moment, he thought his teaching was for the Hebrew people. And she was a Syrophoenician. Not only was they worshiped at the wrong mountain, they worshiped at the wrong altar, they got all the tradition wrong, and Jesus saw that his teaching was for her too. And he grew. And to me, that's perfect love. Every time our love goes just a little bit past where it was. You know, for me, I was brought up in the South. I'll never forget the day Robert E. Lee quit being my hero, because I understood what we did to black folks. I didn't think about it. Imperfect to perfection. Perfection. Okay, last one. Why in the world not doing, okay, I'm having a hard time. Why is the world not doing anything about something in poverty and hunger? Oh, foster care, poverty and hunger. You know, I think the world is, and if you want to see some amazing stuff, find some European news agencies and look what's happening with the immigrants that are flowing from the Middle East. You know, we're not getting a whole lot. Even if we get 100,000 or whatever, that's just a little piece of what's going on. There have already been social service agencies that have emerged and been created in the midst of that to deal with child abuse, to deal with orphans, to deal with women who are pregnant and they're by themselves and they're ready to have a baby. So it's happening. I would say that we're paying more attention to power and security issues because of our fear than we are to the love issues. And that's the part that has to change. And that's, what did Martin Luther King Jr. say? The arc of history bends slowly towards justice. And it's a slow thing. I think it was Yeats who said at the end of one of his poems, I'm having a brain fart right in front of your eyes. What's the big animal out in front of the pyramids? The Sphinx. God bless. The Sphinx slowly turns its head once again towards Bethlehem. You know, we get lost in all the workings of our own stuff, and we forget. And if you will note, when we gather around the table, what is the one word that rings true every week? The word is remember. Reconnect. And that's what we're here to do, to remember so we don't forget, so that we can pay attention, and our paying attention becomes part and parcel of the movement itself. And I want to suggest that that movement will not happen without Jesus Christ. And this will be my final statement. Why do I choose Jesus Christ? Because I believe in Buddha. I believe in all the avatars. Jesus brings us the teaching of the prophets, which shows one thing that all the avatars don't. And that's what I call the hard wiring of love. We can have all the compassion. We can have all the love. But if we don't share it, if I have 2 meals and don't give you one, if I know how to fish and don't teach you how to do it, you see, that's the act. That's why I say Jesus is the salvific one, because it's the act that will save this planet. It's not just realizing that we need more resources towards poverty and foster care. It's doing it. It's moving. It's convincing people. Now we're getting into ethos and pathos. How do we change the belief system of the people so that it gets them off their rear ends to actually do something in the name of this love? That's the gig over and over and over. Most people want to sit in their pew seats and they'd be justified to be comforted, to know that it's all going to be okay. And I'm not suggesting it's not. I believe God wins. And I don't even believe that. I watch it happen. But I know this. We are God's hands and we are God's feet. The incarnation will not happen without these on me and you. And what's in our hearts, that's what's going to come through these. So here we are trying to grow these hearts. Let us offer prayer. Gracious God, thank you for this quest. Thank you inviting us, and mostly thank you for showing us through your Son how to walk this road. Gracious Holy One, through our questions, through my fumbling responses, through the stumbling of the human family, help us. Help us to recognize the openings of your grace and dare to step through in the name of your love. Hallelujah and amen.